Hey guys, how are you all doing? Are you ready for another thought-provoking conversation? I hope so. Let's get to it. I'm going to invite another guest of honor now. This time it's Tyler Scharf. So, all right, I can see Tyler here, so a few more seconds and we'll start. Just let me know how you're doing now,
Hello.
guys. All right, great.
Good. How are
Hey,
you
hey,
doing?
man, how are you doing? I'm doing fine. I'm actually happy that you got the results and you seem to be in high spirits, so hopefully it will continue
Oh
on
yeah,
that
for
note.
the Delta students. Yeah. Yeah, they all did. They all got through. Yeah. So,
Yeah. hmm Well, first things first, I will introduce Tyler. I know that most of you know him because he's the big shot in the LT community, I would say. Tyler originally comes from
yeah.
Canada, right? But now you're living
Yeah.
in Turkey, as far as I remember. And you are a certified CELTA coach,
Tutor. Yeah.
trainer, and ESL
Yeah.
teacher, tutor, right? That's the word. And you know what exactly you're talking about. What I like about you, by the way, is your posts. Very thought-provoking. They speak to me, and thank God today I'm speaking to you.
Thank you.
Okay? So, yeah, let's get to it. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself first before we
Yeah.
dive into the
I mean,
topic?
I guess what got me into teaching was probably I started traveling and I started realizing that there's a lot of there's a lot of different perspectives and ways that people look at the world, right? And teaching is a very useful way
Mm-hmm.
to kind of get inside of people's mindsets, right? And also language as well, because of course you know that using different languages gives you different types of like ways of looking at the world, right? And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, like I went on a holiday for about 3 months backpacking around Europe, and then I realized when I came back home to Canada that like we call ourselves diverse, but we don't recognize that diversity because we all speak the same language, right? I mean, of course, there's lots of people who speak like Mandarin, Punjabi, Russian, Turkish, whatever in their households with their communities, right? But we don't get exposed to it unless we're part of that community explicitly, right? So yeah, we call ourselves like a cultural mixing pot, but we don't actually recognize those differences because the fact that we all speak well either English or French. I mean, at least we're a little bit more diverse than our friends to the south, but the fact that we see that um, all in the same like it's all the same language, it kind of creates a little bit of monotony, right? So then I was like, well, I got to get out there and see some things, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, then I decided to be a teacher, and I was teaching just like general English and exam prep and stuff like that. But I would say when it really changed for me was when I moved to Moscow and I started teaching business English, because I mean, when you teach general English, you're just kind of looking at structures, right? But when you teach business English, you're looking at
Right.
communication events, right? So basically like how people use language in particular circumstances, and what makes it acceptable or appropriate given those circumstances, and what the other people might be expecting or might not want to hear um, in such circumstances. So yeah, I mean
Mm-hmm.
that was probably what kind of changed my perspective on it, and then that's also where I realized that I need to start learning about coaching, because I realized that language teaching education, like we got Delta. I got Delta. We learned about motivation and stuff like that, but we didn't actually learn any tools about motivation. We just kind of learned a bit of theory about like how motivation works, and what motivation
Mm-hmm.
is, kind of in a sense, but we didn't actually recognize how people. Sorry, where is it? Shut up. Yeah, where's it?
It's fine.
I'm live. Come on.
We all love
Yeah, sorry.
cats.
Um, he just likes to make himself present. Yeah. So
Meow. Yeah.
what I was saying is that so coaching helps to kind of get a better
Coaching has
perspective,
become a part of
also
your
in
life.
terms of what people would expect to be said in situations, and also how people respond to certain like goals, right? And how people are oriented towards that, because I mean, I ran
Right.
into quite a few circumstances where I felt a little bit helpless as a language teacher and where I had to kind of look at more of the soft skills motivational perspective too, right? So, yeah.
But why Russia? Why Russia is the question. Like, what
You know
made you
why?
choose
It's because
Russia first?
I actually, my reason was because everything that I have ever been told about Russia is probably wrong. That was what I was like, okay, you know, I'm from the West and I know that like, you know, there's all kinds of nonsense that they like to say about it. So probably everything I know about this country is completely wrong. So I better go and check it out for myself. That was like my, and I was like
Mm,
23 or something, right? So I was still, you know, like young and full of adventure and like ready to go exploring. So I thought, yeah, you know, I mean, I looked at the places around the world, and also because of the opportunity of the business English was you know more, there was greater potential there, right? Because like Russian students are a bit more serious about learning than most nationalities.
mhm.
Perhaps sometimes a little bit too serious, which is a whole different story about motivation, because that can also actually be inhibiting if you take yourself too seriously, right? But the
Right.
Russia was very. I was always curious, you know, when I was traveling, when I was backpacking around Europe, I was in Eastern Europe, and I saw the Russian influence and the cultural like notes,
Hmm.
right, and the kind of like flavors of it, and I was always intrigued. I always thought that it was, you know, it was something that I didn't understand and that I wanted to understand more, precisely because I didn't understand it. And that's kind of like my main, like my creed is when I go to a new country that I don't know anything about it and I learn as I go through it, right? So I just set aside any expectations.
Hmm. I hope you didn't have any rude awakenings when you came here. You know,
Oh,
like,
no, no. No, actually,
was
well,
it all about,
one of my favorite
no?
experiences, and I laugh at this quite a lot, is when I was in the metro at like 6 a.m. because I had a student in Mayakovskaya at like 7 in the morning, and
Hmm.
it was like when I was like first there. I did learn some Russian before I left. I actually learned the alphabet and I learned some survival Russian, so I was able to like basically, you know, how much is it, сколько стоит, you know, what else? Это не моя
Hmm.
вина, right? All these sort of things. Um, and yeah,
Yeah,
and so then I
functional
was
language.
asking this very this well, let's say this ray of sunshine sitting behind the counter at the metro for a card, right? Because I wanted a 1 month pass. So I'm like,
Hmm.
мне можно один месяц, right? No, I
Echo.
didn't miss it. Yeah, and I'm like proud of
Right.
myself. I'm like, yeah, look at my Russian. And she just starts shouting at me, and I'm like, and I sort of repeated it like 2 or 3 times, right? I said it like 2 or 3 times, and she was shouting at me and shouting at me, and then she takes out a card and starts waving it around and shouting, "50 rubly," and I'm like,
Hmm.
I didn't want three. And I'm like, yeah. I'm like, oh no, she wants 50 rubles more. Okay. So she
Here
wanted 50
come
rubles more for
numbers.
the card itself, right? And I was like, I found it quite funny because I actually like, you know, she was being extremely rude to me, but you know, I just look at these situations
Hmm.
like okay, whatever, right? And I found it quite funny because I had the humility to realize that my language is just like terrible, and that I was still able to kind of somewhat figure it out, but she wasn't extremely patient with my ability. But yet I still did get what I needed done, right? I mean, I would be pretty grumpy if I was dealing
Exactly.
with someone like myself at 6 a.m. in the metro as well, but whatever, right?
Well, listen, it's not that they're rude. It's that just us Russians, we're very much straight up and we like the system. We like when
Yeah.
there's the system in place. And, when things got to go out of control, we get a little bit jittery and then, like a little bit cranky. So it's kind of fine. But by the way, this story that you told, I think, is a very good beginning for our topic, for today's theme, authentic communication English. Because you said that you came there with a little bit of a smattering in English, in Russian, yeah, and you knew some of the basics, and you started using the basics and seeing that you were
Hmm.
understood to some extent, yeah, at first. which meant success. And that's what we need. And that's what we're trying to also aim at, right?
Hmm.
As English teachers, right? But where did you get your Delta and your Celta? Like back in Canada or
I
Russia?
never took Celta. You don't need to take it in order to do Delta or in order to be a Celta
Mm-hmm.
trainer. I did my Delta in Istanbul at ITI.
Uh, right, right. So where you
Yeah.
are right now, basically, right? Okay. Yeah. All right. So listen, so it's a very good start to the topic, and hence the question. The theme is authentic communication in English. What and who defines the norms? What is your idea of authentic communication in English, Tyler?
Well, just like getting the message across in a way that is at least the least painful it as possible, right? So like, yeah, I mean, like, that's the thing, when you're looking at a situation where there's someone with a very, very low level of English, of language, whether it's English for me with my Russian at that time, then it's particularly like, you have a very strict function in a very tight environment with a very specific outcome, right? And, in some senses, it's partially on the part of the native speaker to kind of be understanding that, the context itself kind of leads to the results, right? That it can be inferred. So,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when you do have a situation where there's a huge gap in the levels of the speakers, then it's more about just like patience, empathy, and understanding, right? And I'm sure that like if this person had learned a foreign language before, then they might be a little bit more patient about or lived in a foreign country, right? Then they might have maybe found it funny that they remember, like if I ever find myself in that situation, I might kind of smile and laugh a little bit because I remember that happened to me. And that's probably the biggest problem, is that as native speakers of our own language, we take it for granted how easily it comes to us and to those who also share that native language. Now, when we encounter people who do not share it, then it seems like it's like, what's wrong, right? But it's not actually wrong. It's just like there's a lack of putting, empathy, of putting yourself in the other person's shoes and recognizing that there are struggles involved, right? So that's basically when there's a huge gap in the level, is that
Mm-hmm.
I think it's in part responsibility of the higher level person to have patience and empathy for the person at the lower level, because there has to be, there has to be some kind of like desire to collaborate in order to reach a communicative outcome, right? It's not all in one person's shoes, in one person's hands. It's in both people's hands to recognize when someone is trying to get something. And I mean, like, here's another example: is when I was in Italy. Was it Italy? Yeah, it was Italy. I was taking a cruise ship from Italy to Greece when I was like 22, when I was backpacking around. And there was some
Uh-huh.
guy who, like an old man, he was either Swiss or German. And he went up to this little kiosk and asked this woman
Mm-hmm.
for a sandwich in German. And then she started replying to him in Italian. And then he started replying to her in German. And then she started
Mm-hmm.
shouting at him. And he started shouting at her. And I didn't understand either language well enough to figure out what they were shouting about. But it was somewhere along the lines of, why the hell are you speaking to me in your language when you're in my country? And then why don't you learn German? It's a pretty
Oh.
common language. So you work in tourism, you should be able to speak with tourists, right? Because it was right next to a cruise ship, right? And they just shouted at each other, and he got his sandwich. And I kind of like walked up there a little bit timidly, and my Italian was like, what did I say? I can't remember. Uh, I can't remember, but I said like one or two words in Italian, and then the rest in English, and I just kind of like, and she smiled at me, and she was like, "Oh yeah, okay, okay." So, she smiled because she saw that I knew that I knew no Italian, but at least I was trying. I used like one or two words, right? And she was super happy, super
Right.
friendly with me, right? And I think that like you see that a lot with people who like they know that your language is just terrible, but they appreciate the fact that you just gave it a shot anyway, right? That you didn't resist it all the way through. So that's kind of like when
Mm-hmm.
there's a huge difference in levels, right? But when there are two levels that are like, near similar, so the biggest problem exists when you have someone who is at like a B2 or C1 level, and they're communicating with a native speaker because they have the language ability, they have the listening capabilities and the speaking capabilities, but they lack in that essential ability to
Right.
understand what is acceptable, right, and what sounds weird, right? Because there are lots of instances where it's just kind of like still direct translation. In Turkish they have a joke, they call it chicken translation, because there lots of like translate also means to turn, and lots of these kebab shops before Google Translate existed, they advertised their kebab as chicken translation, which basically means chicken that's spinning on a stick, right? Rotisserie chicken, right? Yeah, so it's a false cognate. Yeah. So I mean, it's kind of a joke that you have. You still, even when you reach such a high level, you still do have, I would say, like a failure to communicate in a way that doesn't make the other person pause and either the reaction could be like, oh, that's novel, or it could be like, what, right? Anywhere between those two, right? Where it's just like, oh, that's kind of, and most of the time it is kind of along the lines of that's novel, or that's kind of cute, or that's funny. Whereas, rarely does it actually come across as like, what, or like, that's a bit obscene. And it comes down to the same thing that we talked about just 5 minutes ago, where it is a bit of the empathy of understanding that it is difficult to communicate appropriately, but it's less obvious when the person has a high level of English because they appear competent, they appear fluent, they appear knowledgeable, but then they might say something and it may not be intended to be rude, but it may come across as rude.
Just because the other speaker's English might be not that good, right? Or it could be because of the miscommunication between you, a native speaker, and me, a non-native speaker, because you don't know what kind of English I know and speak when you just start talking, right, to that person. So you might use a different phrase, you might use a joke, and the other person might be like, was it directed at me?
Well,
Are you saying that something's
what the
wrong,
biggest problem
right?
is what comes across as being passive aggressive. So yeah, like we had a speaking club on pragmatics a while ago, and one example, I can't exactly remember what it was precisely, but like it was something like, excuse me, if you don't mind, could you please, like, I don't know, something, right? Stop smoking in here. Or would you be so kind as to... No, yeah, okay. No, so there was an example where there was like you're sitting in a restaurant and the person's smoking and there's a no smoking sign right behind, right, the person. And then the response was like, excuse me, would you be so kind as to read the sign, right? And like linguistically, it's very polite, but then if you said that to me, I'd be like, excuse me, like, well, you think, like, what are you trying to prove here? You think I'm stupid or something, right? Because that's passive aggressive, essentially. Would you please be so kind as to read the sign? Is like, what is wrong with you? Are you stupid, right? But it's disguised. And that's also like the same thing as, especially in British English, where it's like, with all due respect, there is no respect coming. I strongly disagree with you is essentially what you're going to say, right?
Right.
But you think it because, like, yeah,
Exactly.
when you, especially with like a language as direct and as explicit as Russian, right? Because Russian is an extremely low context language. It's probably one of the lowest context languages. When you enter a language like English is not very high context, but it is higher context than Russian. Languages like Chinese, Mandarin are extremely high context. Turkish is relatively high context, right? It's Asian culture. Asian pragmatics are to be more, what is it? Implicit. Yeah. So like, for example, if you go to Malaysia and you say, excuse me, is the beach this way? They will say yes, because it's rude for them to say no, even if the beach is that way, right? So you don't ask them, is it this way? You ask them, where is the beach, right? So like in business, you wouldn't say, can you finish this by the end of the month? Because they'll be like, well, yeah, I think possibly we will do our best, right? Because that just means no, right? Then you ask, when do you think it would be possible to finish? And they would tell you, like, I don't know, April or something, right? So I mean, there's a huge amount of awareness of culture that's necessary, and the differences between high and low context and the spectrum of communication within that band. And when you have a context language like Russian, where everything is what it is written as and everything is what it is expected to be said. And then you come across something like with all due respect, then you're like, oh, that's so nice. He's showing me his respect, right? Yeah, like, oh, what a nice gentleman, right? When in reality, he's being passive aggressive, or he's disguising his anger.
Right. Right. Like nothing respectful comes after with all due respect.
Typically, yeah.
Right? For sure. So when we're talking about this authentic communication and those stumbling blocks, yeah, that we might face, we obviously mean that there are, like, in our LT community, especially, like two parties, I would say, of teachers. Yeah, like two sides, native speakers and non-native speakers. And there's this age-old kind of question, that one of our followers asked, by the way. So we can use it as a plan now to continue the discussion. Anastasia asks, and also you guys, please let us know in the comment section below if the topic seems relevant. Just leave a thumbs up. And if you ever had a miscommunication with someone, something along the lines of what Ty just said. So the question is as follows. Listen up, everyone. What do you think of the concept native speakerism? Can only native speakers be recognized as true language models, or is it possible for non-native teachers to be trustworthy speaking models? So what do you think of this?
Yeah, so, well, there's, again, the age-old discussion of English as a lingua franca, right? And, when you teach useful language, like with all due respect to people like Russians, they will never use that, right? Because it's like, that's just obscene, right? You should at least understand what it means. You should be aware of like what the intention is of this person who is saying this, but you wouldn't really particularly want to force them to use this type of language, right? So that brings us to the question of what is the purpose of learning, right? So when you define the purpose of learning, then it comes down to, are we trying to pass a standardized exam? Then yes, maybe some awareness of communicative competence is necessary in order to make it more smooth, right? But it's not necessarily going to make or break the exam. Plus, you don't really engage in social interactive discussions there. It's more like in most standardized English exams, your conversation is very purpose driven, right? Like of course, there's interactive communication in Cambridge exams, but you have a clear purpose in front of you. You're not just interacting like you would in a networking event. So when it comes down to business English, though, it's extremely important to deal with this type of stuff. And if a teacher has no experience in international communication, then it is important for that teacher to spend some time trying to learn about pragmatics and understanding, like I mentioned earlier, the differences between high and low context cultures and different cultural values when communicating. Because essentially what you are doing is you are preparing a person to go out there in the world and not to make a fool of themselves, right? And not making a fool of yourself does not mean learning present perfect and future perfect and all that stuff. It means being able to respond naturally when people do ask these questions that they will ask, right? Because humans are inherently curious. They will be asking you questions about yourself, your job, and all these different kinds of things. So it basically comes down to, pragmatics, for example, are not even, some native speakers don't have proper pragmatics, right? Like I know lots of people who are extremely unaware of what is socially appropriate, what is deemed acceptable in certain, cultural communication events and like certain situations. So I don't think that this comes down to an issue of being native or non-native. It comes down to an awareness of, are you actually learning how people communicate authentically and how they have awareness of each other's needs during that time, right? So there was an interesting study done. I can't remember who did it, but I came across it in my Delta studies and it stuck with me. It's just one of the things that kind of like stick out in my memory when I was doing all of this, like, pages and pages and books of reading, where they tried an experiment where they tried to teach pragmatics implicitly through, like guided discovery types of techniques, right? And they found that pragmatics cannot be taught implicitly. And I think that that's true. I think that, when I think about that, I think that people who lack in pragmatics were probably just not told these are the things that we don't do when they were children, right? And their parents didn't really instill
Right.
proper values and discipline them for doing things that were not like socially acceptable. So I think that again, it's not a matter of native or non-native. It's a matter of like, how aware are you of what typically occurs in society? Plus, how willing are you to continue learning about the differences between, cultural values and the ways that people communicate? Plus, what is the need of the student? Is the student going to be communicating with, are they going to be doing like business expos in Singapore? Are they going to be studying at the London School of Economics, right? Where exactly are they going to be using their English?
Mm-hmm. Agreed. And also, we all know that cultural mistakes matter most. Yeah, not like linguistic mistakes. If you make this faux pas, talking to somewhere they live, yeah, the language that they speak, obviously that's going to make much of a like bigger impact on the communication itself than just a linguistic mistake. Like missing an article,
No one
right?
notices that.
Or some sort of yeah, right. Everyone notices the cultural mistakes, yeah, that you might make, the pragmatics, as you mentioned, the appropriacy of the situation and of the phrase used then, right? And then again, we all know that the operative word is
Mm-hmm.
driving ideas home, yeah, like getting a message across. That's what we need. But you know what? We have a bit of a problem in Russia, at least especially us teachers, and guilty is charged. Actually, we all try to make sure that if we're like really good teachers, we need to show off a bit language-wise. We think that having C2 is important, using C2 phrases is important, but what we forget is that it's important to get the message across, and sometimes we get tangled
Mm-hmm.
up in that a little bit. Like we think like how to say it, but not a what to say. Hence the problem, you see, because when you're a non-native speaker and you don't have much exposure, for example, like to YouTube, talking to natives, watching movies, right, listening to the radio, of course you don't have this touchstone of what exactly might work here or there. And sometimes if you're not really good enough at that, of course you start thinking of, did I use that right, did I miss the preposition here? But the problem is, think of what to
Mm-hmm.
say. Yeah, you see, but Valentina says explicit teaching get a good deal of bad rap in general, and undeservedly so. You see, right? Valentina also
Mm-hmm.
teaches for exams, and she's been up to the task. I actually would love to stream with you, Valentina, one day. Remember, I asked you about that. So, getting back to this question, it's not about being a native speaker or a non-native speaker. It's all about just knowing all those like intricacies, right? Making sure that you know your stuff well. Yeah, and that you could teach both language,
Yeah,
culture,
well, one of the
pragmatics.
main thing that
Am I
has been
right?
lacking in most curricula is the cultural aspect of it, right? Until recently, I mean, Oxford has been doing a
Mm-hmm.
very good job of starting to integrate this soft skills, 21st century skills, cultural awareness, and things like that into their textbooks. And I think that a lot of their course books are extremely well thought out these days. And then yeah, like business English has started to take it much more seriously as well. But of course, that's because it's a very obvious need. Um, going like yeah, it's basically
Mm-hmm.
about being able to communicate competently in a socially agreed upon situation that kind of meets the expectations and doesn't cause any kind of friction in terms of what is expected to be coming from that. I mean, there is always the kind of like there's when a native speaker encounters someone with an accent, there's almost like a brief primer, right? So it's kind of like the native speaker's previous interaction with foreigners kind of it sets their expectations, kind of like you activate schemata in a classroom, right? It's your past knowledge and your past experience of working or communicating with these types of people, and the ones who have worked in international environments usually don't notice these things because they're more focused on results, right? So getting some kind of like essence of the message, trying to get the specific detail of what we are communicating about. Whereas others who are a little bit less aware, or maybe they don't travel much, right? They might have a bit of a struggle in understanding and being empathetic towards those people, and that's where the friction would emerge more. Going back to what you said
Mm-hmm.
though about the Lexus, I mean that's a very good point, and I always talk about this with my CPE students when we do these groups, is that you're it's kind of a common, one of the most common misconceptions in order to pass one of these exams, you need to basically continuously and unrelentlessly bombard the examiner with C2 collocations, right? And it just sounds weird, and it makes the other people kind of look at you like, and then you look like a show off as well, right? And when you go and do that in the real
Right.
world, like get your head out of the exam room and kind of like give your head a shake a little bit and go and try and do that in like a bar, for example, right? Um, this person will give you such a funny look if you're using like all of these weird idioms and collocations and like, what we call C2 language, right? There is no such thing, but let's just define it as such for the moment. As long as, let's just call it less frequent
Mm-hmm.
expressions, then they will give you such a look, and they will just probably make the next closest excuse possible to stop talking with you, because it will just feel weird for them to communicate with someone in such a way. And I once in my life I met a native speaker who did that, who he studied at Oxford, and he was trying to prove to everyone around him that he was like, his IQ was like a good 50 points above everyone else, right? And everyone around him was just like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, right? And everyone tried to detach from any kind of like relationship or any kind of communication with this person, and for good reason, right? Because it's just like, you can see that you're just trying to show off that you know something that others don't,
Mm-hmm.
but then that's just in a bubble. That's basically a bubble of like Lexus, right? Rather than a bubble of communication. And like the real C2 is basically defined as, you can communicate on almost every topic, pretty much every topic, with flexibility and with ease, right? So I mean, if you want to see how difficult it is to do such a thing, go and give a C2 speaking exam to one of your like B2 level learners, right? And they will break down in the middle, and they'll be like, this is just as obscene. Why are you torturing me, right? So the very fact that you can survive one of those
Mm-hmm.
exams shows that you actually have the ability to communicate at that level or near that level, right? Maybe unless you stick to very simplistic, like present simple and kind of like very day-to-day environment based Lexis, but it's kind of hard to when you're faced with those types of questions, because they're very, very abstract in nature, right? So um, being
Mm-hmm.
able to communicate about abstract concepts comfortably and hold your conversation confidently is more about what it means.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but there are people who don't get it right. The idea of CPE and exams, hence the language. You see, they think that you have to be up to the task, use the phrases, show your examiner that you're really great, by using the language. But the flexibility, the fluency itself, that's what matters a lot. By the way, also, I have a comment here. An example of a culture-bound thing, Russians are fond of using of course as a way of agreement. You see? Like, конечно, конечно. See? Like what like picking up on what we talked about. C2 speak is a feature of language being overlearned but not fully processed, which is a transitionary stage,
Mm-hmm.
right? Is a comment. Yeah, that's the problem. And also, you see, we don't do that in our native tongue when we speak. We don't think of some, fancy ass, excuse my French, phrases, yeah, just to impress. We know that, we know
Well,
how to talk, yeah, who to talk to, in what way. Just because we're natives, we feel
oh yeah,
this
yeah,
kind of the
yeah.
environment of the situation. So it shouldn't be different in
Well,
English or any
yeah, I
other language,
mean,
right?
okay, so there's two ways. Yeah, like when a native speaker speaks with another native speaker, yes, they're not even thinking about the language that they're using, right? They're just trying to, you know, accomplish some specific type of purpose. Then when but then the other thing is, when a Russian user of English communicates, one of the ways that shows learning is by using a diverse range of lexis, right? So you say that someone is a good speaker more because of the words that they choose than anything, right? And that's just that's a feature of your language of what constitutes academic English. And that is one feature of it in English, but it's also about the way that you choose to convey that message in terms of what you prioritize as meaning, and also in writing, the flexibility in sentence structure, right? So there would be multiple clause sentences with some pretty like intricate types of structures, right? Rather than just choice of lexis, right? And variety of above all, right? So there's like I think cohesion is probably the thing that shows it the most, because that's what causes the text to glide. And then there's a huge variety of different types of things that cause it to flow, right? So yeah, basically you move through those, all of those put together, right?
You know what? And actually, a lot of the questions are about this aspect. This thing we're talking about, like, how do we find this balance between what we say and how we say it? As non-natives, what would your best advice be? You know, how do we curb the C2, knowing it, but using it appropriately? Especially if we're aiming for exams, like at taking the exam and making sure we keep this language live in our speech.
Yeah, well, it essentially comes down to immersing yourself into authentic use of that language. So that means like finding high level models, whether that be like articles or podcasts or YouTube, or yeah, you can watch, for more colloquial things, you can watch TV series and things like that, right? But like the people who tend to get stuck and don't really form much of an identity in their second language. So let's say like Russian speakers trying to learn English are more often than not people who consistently read things in their own language, rarely read it in the second language. If they do read it in a second language, they are obsessed with translating every single word because they cannot handle uncertainty. There's another thing, is Russians are very high on uncertainty avoidance. So understanding that in English, we're pretty, we're not terribly low, but we are much more comfortable with uncertainty in terms of like, we read books. I read books and I see words that I don't understand sometimes. And I don't usually pull out the dictionary unless I think it's something that's pretty cool, right? And we usually just infer from context and keep going from that, right? So part of it is in the mindset. I would say all of it is in the mindset, to be honest, is that being able to strike that balance between, of course, improving that mechanical aspect of it, right? So the lexical, the grammatical, structural aspect of it, but then also being able to, again, prioritize meaning, right? Like it's one of the simplest things. It's like rule number one when you go into the CELTA is meaning before form and pronunciation, right? Is because when you start, the whole problem comes down to that, is you basically put form in front of meaning, right? When you start thinking about form too much, then you lose the essence of the message. So yeah, long story short, immerse yourself in as much real language usage as possible. Pay attention, right? So be active. Don't just sit there and, it's good to have leisure time, but it's also good to kind of extract a few things that you find that are interesting. And ask questions above all. I think that's the other thing too, is have someone who you can ask questions to about these little peculiarities. I mean, like one of my so then like, yeah, so here's a story of two students. I've got one student who watches TV series with Russian dubs, right? So the voice is in Russian and the subtitles are in English. And he thinks that he's learning. I told him, like, no, you do not do this. This is not useful. And then he always tries to translate every word in the article. And I keep telling him, like, just read it as quickly as possible. Don't pause to translate. Just see if you can understand the overall meaning, right? And yeah, and then, most of his interactions when he goes abroad are very transactional, right? So basically just like asking service staff for support and things like that. Whereas here's another profile of a student I had who brief context, he used to be the captain of an icebreaker ship in the North Sea in the Soviet Union. Now he's vice president of a major shipping company. And he, every day before our lessons, I think every day actually, I don't think just before our lessons, but every day he would drive to work listening to audiobooks. And the guy had a memory like an elephant. Like he would come in and he'd be like, I heard a very interesting structure when I was on my ride to work today. Could you please explain a little bit about it to me? And then I'd explain a little bit about it. He's like, yeah, I understand the form, but why did they say that? Right? Like why? So he keeps asking why. And that's basically the explorer mentality, is that this man was, he has a routine. He's an executive. He has his, his life structured in front of him, but he still sees everything as novel. So being able to see these experiences in the mundane as novel allow people to open up and notice things more, right? And that's essentially it.
Right. Yeah, being an observer.
And an experimenter, right? And an explorer, right? Because you cannot just sit there and let the language happen to you. And that's also where we get these failed assumptions that, I guess you can never learn a language without living in the country. No, you can live. Okay, here's another study. Here's another very interesting study that I came across in my Delta studies many years ago, and I still remember it. There were 2 Italians that they did research on who migrated to the UK in, I think it was the 70s or the 80s. I don't remember exactly. And they were brothers, and they just kind of like journaled their experiences with the culture and their integration and things like that. And basically, one of them did what they were very exemplary students of these 2 profiles I just explained to you. One of them immersed himself in the language, made new friends, integrated in society, and his level was like B2 within a matter of months, right? The other one didn't. He stuck to his routine. He basically, communicated only for transactional purposes, right? He just wanted to accomplish certain tasks, right? And he basically plateaued around the intermediate level, where it was mostly about like, I need this, I need that, right? Because there was no identification. And then once they started looking at their language learner identities, of course, one of them had formed a much stronger L2 identity in English, while the other still were very closely related and defined himself as what that Italian is, right? You will never really, like, not saying that you should get rid of your L1 identity, but your L2 identity should not be suppressed by your L1.
Yeah, that's a good thought, by the way. Yeah, also, by the way, picking up on what you said, Valentina says, yeah, I mean, speaking about that guy, I think, just sit and wait for the language to dawn on you. Also, Valentina mentioned that when it comes to grammar, when you mentioned grammar, remember a few minutes ago, what is effective is not the use of some particular structures like conditionals, inversion, etc., but a bead necklace where each bead is a clause. So clause strung together to express ideas in one stretch is grammar. What do you think? I like this one. Yeah, this kind of association with the bead necklace, yeah, where you have the vocabulary as beads, probably even, yeah, and even the string as this grammar that binds it together, right, and creates this beautiful message that you can carry on and pass on, yeah, onto another speaker or learner.
Yeah, and then that's also where you see, like, overusage of certain structures, because they seem to be more like C2 type of structures, and then that causes, like, what are we emphasizing?
Yeah, exactly.
If we use an inversion in every third sentence, right? There is no emphasis anymore, so it loses the actual meaning.
Yeah. But you know what? I think we're starting to finally wake up to the fact that it's not the C2 or C1 thing that defines language, right? But again, appropriacy, pragmatics of the situation. I don't actually like those letters, you know, A1, A2, B1, B2. I've never taken an exam myself because I think that, you know, it's really hard to pinpoint exactly where I could be good at or bad at. Also, for example, I believe that exams are mostly about academic English or neutral English, right? But if I'm learning language for like speaking, communication, I usually gravitate towards YouTube, you know, talking to native speakers like you, watching TV series, breaking them down. So, and if I go and take the exam, obviously I'm going to be dealing with a different register, which I also know, but it's not part of my job and part of my life. So you see what I think to be a proficient speaker of English in the good sense of the word, yeah, and especially if you teach for exams, it's a good idea to have this you know, melting pot of all the registers put together, you know, reading, of course, news, yeah, and maybe even scientific articles, breaking down articles, watching TV series, talking to natives, writing. So it should be not just focused on one thing. Like, for example, I am C2 because I took CPE and I know my academic stuff. Yeah, it should be like a mixture of all of those registers. And again, it should be you should definitely wrap your head around the fact how to use them, yeah, how to apply them, not to mix them up, right? That's what we get wrong
Well,
sometimes,
yeah, but
you know,
it
and that's
basically
what
you, Stan, you're very proactive because you actually know what you want to learn. So you go out there and you use Instagram as a tool to also teach yourself the language because you integrate all of the things that you interact with into your own, it's your content is actually like your learning journey as well, right? Because you go through all of these things,
mm-hmm.
you actively seek it, you do explore, right? You already have that you're very autonomous, obviously, because you're doing this yourself. um, you don't sit there and wait for someone to give you this language. You go and actually seek it. You go and find the things that you find interesting, and then you go and share it with other people, right? Exams are useful
Right.
for people who are
Mm-hmm.
not so autonomous, who want a structured approach to gaining a higher level, right? And most of the time it is, yeah, just for what do we say? Yeah, just for like migration or for getting into a university or for for
Work.
work or
Right.
just to like show the level
Mm-hmm.
of English, right? Some people, the people who do it for a challenge, it's because they see it as a useful tool, right? And like I don't know. I mean, I don't want to say exams are good or bad. The reason why I got so interested in exams is more because of the motivation aspect of it, because that's where things get extremely interesting. You do see a lot of different profiles in terms of mindsets related to exam preparation. That's a whole different story altogether, though. But essentially, what I'm saying is it comes down to the degree of autonomy in actively exploring the language, and then how proactive you are in using what you see and sharing it, right? And I mean, Instagram is
Right.
it's as much as people like to hate on it, it's a wonderful tool for actually, if you use it the right way, for actually getting, it's like a journal essentially, right? You can kind of get your thoughts out there in an easier way. Nobody writes down in journals. They send it all through Instagram these days.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah, so that was my point. Like we should do all of this together, yeah? Exam if we want to especially work up some passion
Mm-hmm.
towards the language, right? Then a bit of maybe TV series breakdown, make sure that we add a bit of a native speaker talk, you know, every once in a while. That should be
Yeah,
that
as
diverse.
many things that
Yeah,
you seem
that was
that
the
you see as relevant towards your learning outcomes, right? So
Yeah, exactly. Now, let's move on to the teaching tools because we mentioned pragmatics, appropriacy a lot, but I think the bigger question is how do we find them? How do we make sure that how do we verify them? Let's put it that way. For example, one of the questions was an age-old one, okay? Can dictionaries help to define the norms of where and how to use some phrases, or it only comes from life and teaching experience?
yeah, well, dictionaries are
You know
quite
what?
limited because they're retrospective, right? So they are backwards looking, and they are
Mhm.
basically like it takes at least a year for something to enter the dictionary, right? and they add new words in the dictionary quite late. I
Right.
mean, there are lots of words that I could name that have probably not been integrated into the dictionary as of yet, just because they haven't been kind of mainstreamed, because they're more like related to particular niches or particular subcultures, right? So, I mean, it's good
Casual
to, yeah, I mean,
conversations.
the
Hmm.
Urban Dictionary is an interesting thing to explore, but it's not safe for work, that's for sure. Don't 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 show that with some young students
Right.
or anything like that, or you might get yourself in trouble. But the Urban Dictionary is
Uh,
definitely something that's a little bit more enlightening. I mean, I even have to check some things in there sometimes because, to be quite honest, it's very subculture centric, right? So dictionaries will help because, I mean, one thing that I like particularly about the Longman Dictionary is the sheer quantity of examples, because there's a large volume of
hmm.
examples in there that you can kind of spend your time just investigating. Because, yeah, in order to discover how it's actually used, you need to see it used in a larger volume. You can't just, that's the thing I don't like about Cambridge, is that there's only like a couple examples, right? They don't use too many of them. So it's pretty clear definitions, but then you need a larger quantity. So then that's also where tools like Corpora are very useful, because you can go and look
Hmm.
through different. You can see also if it's a spoken or a written or an academic, or where it came from, right? Maybe it's something that has 90% of hits in fiction and only 10% in spoken English, right? Then probably you wouldn't walk around on the street saying that word.
Hmm.
So yeah, you can basically, corpors are very useful tools to learn how to use if you are, willing to experiment with them and just kind of like tweak them and use them like Google search engines. Um, Other than that, I mean, business English textbooks are extremely good, particularly in company. This is Macmillan, Mark Powell. Anything Mark Powell does is just fantastic, in my opinion. Um, because even if you're not teaching business English, then there are still some very nice little pieces that you can take from there, like little tools or little exercises or even chapters, right? So for example, like something on socializing is still very relevant for people who don't want anything to do with business, right? Because it still teaches them how to interact in various
Hmm.
communication events, right? So um, yeah, like for someone who's relatively new to teaching these kinds of things, I would recommend starting with a business English textbook like In Company and taking some pieces from there related to networking, socializing, building relationships, just soft skills types of things. Also, yeah, some of the Oxford books
Hmm.
for teenagers have some things like that too. They're not as explicit about their pragmatic rules, though. That's the thing, is that pragmatics are, again, language is living, right? So pragmatics are kind of a little bit dynamic, right? They do change a little bit.
Hmm.
For someone who understands those basics, I think that the next thing you need to do is start learning about culture. So having a good awareness about uh, cultural values, cultural descriptors, for example, like Geert Hofstede, um, or what's the other guy's name? Michael Lewis, right? These guys, they have cultural models, right? Learning about high versus low context
Hmm.
cultures, learning about cultures that prioritize facts, cultures that prioritize people, cultures that prioritize trust in their communication, learning about the differences between uncertainty avoidance, how hierarchy affects um, people and cultures and things like that, right? That
Hmm.
helps you to recognize the differences, like the metrics for how we expect communication to be done, and then do little like role play situations where you put yourself in the shoes of a foreigner coming to your country. This is one of my favorite ones. It's very simple. I want to start a business in your country. Give me some advice, right? You can, with that question, you can run an
Hmm.
entire lesson basically, just based off that question.
Right. Hmm. And just also elicit some vocab along the
Mm-hmm.
way, obviously. These are good. Thank you so much for mentioning them. Some of the names I also mentioned in the chat. By the way, what do you think of Collins? Collins Cole Build Dictionary. I like it because, I like it. I like the way it explains words. And I mentioned that already in some of the streams. For example, if you take the word trot, you could say if a baby or a horse trots, it means that they make light steps,
Hmm.
like light, quick steps. Uh, so I like the way that they actually say who can trot, who can peruse, or what can you peruse, for example, when it comes to C2 vocab, by the way. Yeah. So it gives examples and it
Hmm.
gives some collocates. So what do you make of this one? Do you ever use that, or do
Yeah,
you ever
Collins is
recommend that
also
for your students?
Collins and Longman have the best corpora backing their dictionaries and at least display it publicly, right? I'm sure that Cambridge and Oxford have corpora as well, but they don't make it as publicly available. So yeah, they're both very useful tools. And then just like getting, when there's this is also a very important thing for teachers is like when there's a question about a word, and if you don't know the answer to it, that doesn't mean that you're a bad teacher. It doesn't mean that you're like wrong or something. And in fact, even if you do know the answer to it, you should get your student to go and figure it out, right? Because you're teaching them skills that are transferable outside of the classroom. So you get them to go and maybe you go together like, oh, that's a very good question. Why don't we check it together? Why don't we go and explore a little bit, right? And then you can
Yeah.
have little mini exploring sessions.
We do have a bit of a problem with that. As Russians, we're used to having this idea of knowing everything, and we're not okay if some question arises and we don't know an answer to it. So it's important to also make sure that you're not that know it all. It's
Well, this is
okay. It's
cultural
okay
as well
not to
because
know.
hierarchy, right? So it's a hierarchical society, and it's got low uncertainty avoidance, which means it needs to be explicit, which means that most learning happens
Hmm.
horizontally, right? So like the higher the authority expert gives the information, right? And to be honest, in not like related to languages, but to be honest, like a lot of this there's a big dispute about info gypsies going on in the Russian blogging market right now about like how people are creating courses about everything from like
Hmm.
making candles to like I don't know, yeah, to like curling your cat's hair to I don't know, everything, right? And to be honest, that type of business model would okay, so let's take like some more like for example a fashion course, right? um, or like some kind of like expert type of level course, like I don't know, like cryptocurrencies for example. That would be seen as a scam in the West
Hmm.
because they would say you can go on the internet and you can go
Hmm.
and find all that information for yourself. Why would you pay someone? Because it's all there, and it's ridiculous because this is just a cash grab, right? So a lot of that's just kind of like the knee-jerk reaction of the Westerns because it's like, well, we can go find it ourselves, right? It's all available on YouTube. I just watch YouTube all day and I learn everything. But I mean, both are right, right? You do need experts because experts distill information, but you also have the ability to find information yourself, right? So you kind of got to give, like a Westerner needs to trust an expert a little bit more and like, pay a bit for a course sometimes, whereas a Russian needs to, um, you know, before getting the expert to spoon feed the information, go and see if they can find something first, right? So, like it's
Hmm.
also it's kind of like a knee jerk reaction for a lot of people to just ask, can you ask this person to tell me how this is done, right? And then it's like, well, why don't you Google that, right?
Right.
Google is a very useful skill in this day and age. Yeah. Yeah, so
To
there's,
learn.
I mean, there's two
Yeah,
sides of
yeah.
that, but that
I
comes
mean,
down to the degree of autonomy and enabling people to use tools, right? Because tools are very beneficial, because like your student isn't going to call you when like something there's an email or something, right? They're going to have to go and look for it.
right, right, exactly. But you know what? Sometimes we just, want a little bit of spoon feeding. Like, find it, tell me, I want to listen. And we have a lot of
Yeah.
marathons like that for sure. But fortunately, they turn out to be frauds.
Well,
So,
yeah, I mean, there are it's a big industry right now, and there are lots of people who are just kind of like recycling information, and they're not really adding any value. There's no critical thinking involved, right? It's just really good. Yeah,
but
there's
there is
demand and there's
demand,
really good marketing,
you
right?
know?
And then, the whole like warm-up cycle of the blogger just gets people feeling FOMO, and then they just throw their money at something and then they never use it, right?
Mhm.
So um, yeah, I mean, there is kind of, again, a delicate balance to be struck there, because it's hard to, the problem with Instagram is it's hard nowadays to evaluate the quality of someone's information, right? Because you only see
Mhm.
one side of it.
Right.
So if you're a complete noob and you've got no information on a topic, and someone presents themselves as looking very, very professional, you could very readily just trust and buy, right? Just because of the way that they kind of like, you know, provide that image. And I know I've been victim of like trusting people who are not professional just because of the way that they seemed to have presented themselves, or that they were early, or they were there before other people were, or things like that. And that's, it's essentially, it comes down to, um, where else can you find the information as well?
Agreed. Agreed. But again, you see, it's all about the lack
Yeah.
of exposure. If you're not exposed enough to something that you're striving to also achieve, hence the problem. By the way, did you ever have cases where you would have some like CE or CP candidates who would come to you and say, Ty, you're up to the task. I want to do it too. I want to get to CP in 2 months, but here's the bad news. I'm B2.
Um,
Because we all want those, get high, yeah, I mean language-wise schemes. We all want them, right? We all want to be like that good, but in a mere matter of
no, that
time,
usually happens with
unfortunately.
IELTS, actually. Yeah.
IELTS, because of the time sensitive thing, yeah, because you're supposed to like take it as soon as possible since you're moving house or you're
Partially,
going
yeah, but
somewhere to
also
study,
because
right?
I mean, most people who come for CA and CP are aware of the Common European Framework. They're teachers mostly, and they do have a basic understanding. Most of the time, they tend to underestimate themselves. So I'll get people who want to take the
Mm-hmm.
CAE course who pass the CAE exam, the diagnostic test, and I'll be like,
Mm.
yeah, that's nice and stuff, but I think that you're wasting your time. I had one student, actually, my very first CAE student, as a private student, who took the exam and got like a pass B. And I'm like, this is not worth your time. She's like, no, I just want to go through it one by one. I'm going to do this one first, and then I'm going to do the next one. I'm like, okay, well, you're paying me by the hour, so whatever, right? It's your choice. And then, yeah, and then she did the same thing with like TKT and SELFA and Delta, and she went through all these certificates. And then at the end, she's like, I'm sick and tired of all this paid torture stuff. Yeah. Yeah. I'm like, well, I don't know. I mean, I tried to warn you at the beginning, but whatever. So, but with IELTS, sorry, go ahead.
But yeah, no, sorry. My point was that's the point. You have the whole 9 yards, but you're still not happy.
Yeah.
You see? So sometimes it doesn't give confidence. It doesn't give this sense of fulfillment when you have all the certificates. But I gotta admit, it gives you at least a test of
Yeah.
perseverance. It's a test of perseverance. Yeah, it's a test of making
Yeah.
sure that you can really do it. Yeah, but the bigger question is when you overestimate yourself. There are many cases like that, when you're like, well, genuinely, you are not actually even C1, but you're aiming for C2 and you want to take it. I think that's the bigger problem when we don't understand that. And it just brings up the topic of lack of
Yeah.
self-awareness. You see? You see? By the way, one of the questions was, I totally agree with the point that in Russia it would be great if society developed more autonomy working with information. At the same time, info marketing came to Russia mostly from the USA. What do you
Yeah.
have to
Yeah,
say on
it
that?
did. But I think that they've moved mostly past it. I don't know. Although it's weird because, yeah, like a lot of these, it's a different thing that they do over there. It's kind of weird how they don't really call it a course anymore. It's no,
A
marathon was
marathon, I
never
guess.
cool. No one ever used that. It's more of like
Mm,
yeah, like a basically like a club, right? Where you kind of get to be a part of like some kind of expert group of like people, and then it's mentoring is what it is. Yeah, it's mentoring, right? Yeah. So
mention. Yeah, I like
yeah,
it.
there are totally a whole bunch of scammy info products over there as well. And but then what I was trying to say is that like there's more people are more readily willing to say that an info product is a cash grab and a scam because of the fact that the information is available elsewhere. So yeah, I mean, not saying that
Hmm.
they don't exist, but it's just like, more of like society's perception to that. And then it depends entirely on the values of the community too, right? Like, um, there's still a huge market over in America for like teach yourself Spanish and whatever, right? But then I'm sure there's still lots of people who will just pay for
Hmm.
teachers because it's easier. So
Right. Yeah. But it's also about the frequencies we're on, because we're all on different
mhm.
frequencies in life. Yeah. So to say, if I find fulfilling to have to participate in a
Well, it's
marathon,
fun, yeah. I mean,
okay,
lots of people
knock
like it
yourself
because it's like
out.
a hobby
If
too,
you're
right?
Right, right. So I have nothing against that. I mean, if you want this, yeah, jump to it. By the way, we also mentioned when you were saying that you occasionally use Urban Dictionary, coming back to the topic, yeah? You mentioned that Urban Dictionary is good, Longman, Corpora, and everything, but we also had a question about your own attitude to some of the phrases. So here it goes. Angelina asked, did your attitude to some phrases change over time as a native speaker and places where you lived? When you're asked about some conversational phrases, will you say, no, it's not appropriate to use this phrase here? Or will you hesitate and promise to check it out, to look it up? Where do you check it? Well, where do you check it, you said. But how about that one? How often does it happen where you're like, wow, I don't know whether it's
So
applicable
the
here?
sun's coming. I just got to move out of the sun here.
It's fine. I have the same situation. I'm like Snow White
Yeah,
already
I
because
didn't
I'm
expect to. It's been
sitting in front of the
a
window.
very gloomy week here in Istanbul. Just today, the sun
It's
started coming out, and it's out in full force.
no, here it's very sunny right now. It's the sun is in my eyes, but I can't sit anywhere else right now.
Yeah,
So,
there's. I mean,
so
I
anyways,
always encounter some weird things, and to be honest, I would probably say that I lose 1 point on use of English in CPE on average because there's some. I usually just blame it on British English. It's like some weird British thing that I never would use.
English, right?
Um, but yeah, no, I mean it's totally because again, it's just like it's again the context, right? So there's lots of like British expressions that I learned. Like for example, we would never say cheers, right, in Canada for you're welcome, or not at
Right.
all, right? These are some very simple examples. And I first was exposed to this when the cashier in Turkey said that to me, and I was like, "What do you mean not at all?" Right? I actually had to Google it. I think I was like, "What? Why did she say not at all to me?" Um, I thought it was maybe a mistake, right? But then I realized that yeah, um, that's kind of yeah, what people say, right? So
But I mentioned that because it's one of the first phrases we are taught at unis and schools here in Russia. Like, not at all. Thank you, not
mhm.
at all. Don't mention it, you know? But again, when you like dive into English, you might also come across, sure,
Yeah.
no problem, no
We
worries,
say
you
sure in
got
Canada
it,
all
no
the time.
biggie,
That's
right?
usually how you can recognize a Canadian is the
Hmm.
way we pronounce it too.
By the way, how about you got it? Like, thank you, you got it. I heard it's
Yeah, that's more
mostly
American.
American,
And
like
then
northern,
Americans will be
you
like,
know.
"Oh, you're awesome," right? Like they love complimenting things all the time. I've got a student. He ran a marathon in LA, and he said that he like the whole way he was going, and everyone was like, "You're awesome. Yeah, you got it, man. You're gonna do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're killing it." And he's just like, "These Americans are just so crazy." He thought it was cool, but like it's just so like different, right? And yeah, of course, I mean that's part of it is that there are national location based differences in the ways that people communicate, and you will have to learn them as you travel. Then there are community based differences in the ways, and you'll have to learn them as you integrate. So if you start working in IT or something like technology related, you would probably change the way that you speak. And then if you were to start
Hmm.
working with lawyers, for example, right? So and then also like
Right.
gamers speaking to each other versus like I don't know, executives on a holiday sitting around a glass of wine in like it just basically is you have differences in the location, the age, the type of work that they do, right? So that pretty much makes up the how formal or informal they are, right? And then what kind of colloquial expressions they will use or will not use, if their like lexical range is extremely developed or not, right? If they work in a blue collar job, they probably may not have as much. Although I do have a good friend who's got a very wide range of Lexis, who is a blue collar worker. So yeah, I mean, it depends, right? It really
Hmm.
depends.
It does. It does. But it looks like sometimes non-native speakers are better at, like using different phrases from different varieties of English because we pick up on, some American English, Canadian English, British English, right? Australian English, which you might not know. By the way, a quick question. Can you think of at least one or two phrases you would use in Canada, which would be very Canadian,
Oh, for
and
sure,
we would
eh?
have to look it up.
Yeah. A, yeah, and then
Hey,
well, for sure,
hey,
we always say
okay,
all the
hey,
time,
this
and
A
we also pronounce it like that, for sure. For sure. Yeah, so like her,
for sure.
we got a bit of a stronger schwa, I would say. Um, about what you're talking about, right? It's kind of like,
Fancy.
yeah, you would use that. What you talking
About.
about, eh? Um, well, what are you saying? Yeah, here's a good one. What are you saying? What are you saying means like what's up, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So when you come into a room, you could say, "What are you saying?"
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
you would usually say with one person. Yeah. So like, what are you saying? What's good?
Cool.
You could say that's a little bit more street. What's good? Um,
Mhm.
what's
How
cooking?
about
Yeah,
what's
yeah,
cooking?
yeah. I asked that once to someone who thought I was talking about drugs. I'm like, no. What's wrong with you?
Yeah. Because cooked means baked,
Yeah.
yeah, which also means stoned, right? Yeah, I mean in slang English. Okay. Wow, really good to know. Really cool. Guys, if it was very useful and new for you, just leave a plus or just a thumbs up, okay? Ty, we have so much to discuss, but I think I'll keep you just for another 10 or 15 minutes because I know how busy you are. So we have a few quick questions,
Hmm.
okay? If you don't mind. Well, quick, not quick. Hopefully, we'll try to answer them. Let me even choose because most of them are very similar to each other, to one another, I'd say. Oh, that's a good one about textbooks. What do you think of the expiry period of textbooks in terms of the appropriacy of language, functional language, grammar? I remember you mentioned at the beginning of the live stream that you like that they are becoming
Yeah.
more effective and efficient. Yeah. But as for the expiry date, also, I mean, how much does it take for a course book to get outdated? And how can we non-natives identify that? And also, one more thing to add to that from me, how authentic and true to life is textbook English in your book?
Um, so yeah, basically you can see the way that textbooks evolved. Like in the 80s, they were very much just like a series of functions and stuff, right? And it was very like I don't know, basically just a bunch of like what they would call useful language. But then it was very mechanical and it was
Mm-hmm.
just like chunks of information, but not really, not enough context, right? Then we came into the communicative approach and we started getting into all of this, like, you know, guided discovery type of stuff where we kind of like bring receptive skills into productive and we have, reading and we follow the same context and the same topic, right? And as that happened, I think that pragmatics started to kind of emerge a little bit. And the,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like some core functions of communication in terms of manners will always be the same, right? So I would probably say that most of the things that you
Mm-hmm.
could teach up to maybe like intermediate or maybe even upper intermediate about manners, it doesn't really matter where that comes from, right? Because manners are manners. I would say that the ones that are like in the 80s, or if they do touch on that, they're probably a bit old fashioned, right? And um, that type of like super politeness might seem as a bit weird to a native speaker. because it might seem that you,
Mm-hmm.
when we see someone who's being like too polite, we think that they have some kind of ulterior motive, like they're trying to like, um, yeah, they're trying to get
Butter
something
up.
from you. So it's like, okay, so yeah, what do you want, right? What are you trying to get from me? Is basically what we see when there's too much politeness, and we don't trust that if it comes across as a bit inauthentic. So then that's where I would say that there's this new generation of textbooks that have emerged. So far, I've only seen it from Oxford. I haven't really seen it from other publishers, and that's why I think Oxford's leading the field here, is because they are looking at what they call the
Mm-hmm.
21st century skills, and that integrates soft skills,
Right.
which also deal with pragmatics as well, and cultural awareness. So, I mean, basically, if I were to choose a book for like a group right now, it would probably be one of those that have those skills in them.
By the way, just to give you some kind of context, I'm not exactly a textbook approach teacher. I'm a textbook free approach teacher, but I'm obviously aware of textbooks around there. So, are you okay if I name a few books that come to mind and you would say, if you know them, that they're really good to use in a classroom? Because all of us are kind of plagued by this question, what textbook to choose if we have to, especially when we work in schools or universities. For example, we have outcomes. Yeah, we have upstream, cutting edge, speak out. Guys, can you help us out? What other textbooks are now like the top dogs? Yeah, in the teaching industry. So apart from among these outcomes, speak out, upstream, cutting edge, focus, which ones do you know and which ones would you
Well, I've
recommend?
looked through most of them, and in terms of like, yeah, most of them are just very language based, right? There's not a lot of like
Mhm.
pragmatics or communicative like awareness being developed in them. So yeah, I mean, the one that I find most interesting nowadays is called Insight, um, just because of the
Mm.
reasons that I have said, and also because of how it encourages critical thinking. So it's pretty interesting in the way that it has questions that get students to think a little bit more rather than just like pick up language. But yeah, I don't really use a lot of textbooks, to be honest, either. And I use mostly ones related to specific communication purposes, right? So like
Mhm.
most of my
Mhm.
students nowadays
Mhm.
are business anyway, and so we're more on that side of things, just because I find it more interesting. And
Mhm.
I mean, we tend to also spend a lot of time discussing current events, right? And that doesn't really like that. The cover textbooks can't cover that, right? They can cover like social issues.
And parsnips some of the parsnips, those things that you cannot include into the textbook, which we discussed with Anastasia in a live stream, but you're supposed to talk about them anyway. A little bit of societal topics, yeah, social, a bit of politics in the good sense of the word, yeah, a little bit of some, kind of day-to-day
Hmm.
topics. By the way, the textbooks are also Navigate, English File. Yeah, I am also aware of these. National Geographic. I actually thumbed through that book and I found it awesome because
Hmm.
it also teaches life, you know, and roadmap as well. Empower, right? New English File, Evolve. Do you know
Yeah,
any
I
of
just
these
haven't
though?
really used them very much myself.
Yeah. So is it safe to say that it's not the best idea to just rely even on a good textbook in the
Yeah,
classroom
I think
now,
so.
these
It
days?
also depends on your students' goals, right? Like for example, if you've got like a teenager who will be studying for, let's say, Yege, but she wants to develop her English with
Mm-hmm.
you in the meantime until she starts taking that exam, then it
Mm-hmm.
might be a good idea to find a textbook and move through it, right? That's where Insight, I think, is a good book because, I have worked through that book with a teenager and she found it very interesting. She really liked it a lot, just because of the types of topics that they covered and, the types of questions and the discussion points and like just like the way that it kind of expanded her worldview a little bit. So yeah, but you should also think,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you should also think about, is it expanding the worldview, or is it just routine, mundane topics?
Right, right. So, as well as you mentioned current events, it's a good idea. I also do that. So, besides the textbook, discussing current events, maybe incorporating a little bit of YouTube into the classroom would be a great idea, right? So, it's just sometimes we're afraid because we're not given much leeway in the classroom. If we work in state schools or unis, or we're not confident enough to teach outside of the textbook because at least the textbook has the answer
Hmm.
sheet. I mean, the key, yeah, and then the scripts and some of the teacher's notes,
Hmm.
and it also takes a lot of time. But I think we're all now waking up to the fact that there is more to English than
Yeah,
just a
but
textbook, right?
you shouldn't abandon it
What is the
completely
question?
though either.
Yeah, well, when you're just starting out, it's a good idea to use a textbook, both when you're a first time teacher or you're teaching students at A1 or A2, right? And then
Hmm.
you just build on that, yeah, incorporating more and more realia and just some really good resources. And one more question, I think it's again kind of similar to what we're discussing because today's topic is about authentic communication, yeah, and what and who defines the norms. Um, Anastasia is asking, what means and methods can we apply in our job to encourage our students of low levels not to completely rely on textbooks, but dig deeper and read and listen and watch? You see, similar question, but still with a bit of a
Well,
twist. So with higher levels, it's clear. Yeah, we are now more autonomous. We kind of understand how to go about it. But when it comes to low
well,
levels,
what you got to do is,
it's a bit of a
I
problem.
mean, you show them something, like for example, a YouTube video. You bring it in and you structure something around that, and then as a homework task, you get them to bring one in response, right? So just basically getting them to go out there and find things. It's quite simple, right? So you do what we were talking about before. You use some authentic resources related to their interests, and then you get them as a homework task to bring one in response, right? And then structure some kind of questions or some kind of task around that. So it's just make it interactive.
Mhm. And lead by
Yeah, you can't
example,
just
I
say go
think.
out there and get a
Yeah,
YouTube video, right?
show
Because
that
they'll be
you
like, I don't know
are
what to watch, right? You kind of got to give some kind of example or model, right? Yeah.
right. Yeah, yeah. Show them that you yourself watch YouTube, that you like using this as a teaching tool, right? Last question is as follows.
Hmm.
I will read it out for you. All right. By the way, guys, if you agree with us, just leave a thumbs up or suggest your own ideas and comments. We're always welcome. Also, make sure if you're watching this on demand, if you're watching the recording, leave thoughts, ideas for us, okay? Some commentaries. We are very much happy to hear what you have to say. So the question is, it's known that English teachers correct their students' mistakes. Usually they say, kids, you must learn to speak Royal English. You know that in Russia it's a thing, yeah? Like RP, we want to talk like that, for some reason. What does it mean to speak Royal English? Does the notion Royal English really exist? Is real English considered to be the norm these days? And should it be the priority when it comes to choosing what English to teach? Because, for example, you're a Canadian, which puts more of a twist on American English. Does that mean that you can't
No,
teach
I
it? Of
mean,
course not,
I've
but
taught.
still.
I mean, I've used books that are British English, so obviously it's teaching based on. You just basically need a foundation, right? You need a foundation. You need a structure, but you need not to stick to that. So you need to be flexible, right? You need to be able to kind of like recognize, because if you're too like strict and you're too stuck to certain rules and stuff, then there's no then fluency will suffer above all, because there's an inhibition that if I don't say it the right way, it's not going to be acceptable, right? So you need to allow that
Hmm.
creativity, because it's actually quite simple. It comes back to the English as a lingua franca, that an it's not a
Hmm.
native speaker language anymore. It's a language that we all use, and we use it in different contexts. So as long as you're not saying something that seems obscene to the listener, then it's going to be okay. And if you do try to learn Royal English, and if you go and speak like that, people might either think that you're being pretentious or fake, depending on where you go, right? Like if you go to a pub in the UK, people might look at you a little bit weird because that's they don't expect foreigners to do that kind of stuff, right? So it all comes back to what we were talking about in the beginning about, you know, what is the right context, because, you know, the way that I speak when I'm teaching English is entirely different from the way that I speak when I'm speaking with my friends or when I'm speaking in certain subcultures in different communities, because even the way that I write and chat and type and things like that, right? Because it's just like, you would look weird if you don't do it the way that they do it. So it's more about fitting in rather than having a perfect model, because there is no perfect model anyway.
Which means you are grading your language and trying to like sound at least more standard.
Well, you need to
when you
provide a good
teach,
model, right?
right?
So like you wouldn't use any kind of like you know, short form slang or like, you know, like when you're teaching, you need to provide a clean model, right? Then, you know, when you're communicating in like business, for example, you can be a little bit more informal, right? You can use some things that are a bit colloquial, but you can't be inappropriate or something that might be seen as like insensitive,
Mm-hmm.
right? And nowadays it's really easy to be labeled as insensitive. I mean, it's everyone gets offended about everything these days. So I mean, you got to be really careful depending on where you're speaking and who you're speaking to.
Yeah, and it looks like, you know, those two words, appropriacy and pragmatics, are like literally woven into the fabric of our conversation today, you know? This is the key. Yeah? When you're especially C1 and C2, make sure you work on these two
Yeah.
notions, right? Make sure you work on your appropriacy. And how do we do that again, to sum it up? Expose yourself to more English, real English, yeah, outside of the classroom, both teachers and learners, because obviously this live stream is mostly for teachers, since our following is teachers mostly, right? And that's where we're also aiming at, since learning language is like a never-ending process, right? Even for native speakers,
Yeah,
right,
but I
Ty?
mean, being able to handle that and accept it makes it much easier to do, right? So just letting go a little bit and just trusting that you're going to learn what you need to learn when you actually learn it.
By the way, good, interesting statement by Marina, I guess. Guess it's better to sound a bit bookish than to offend someone. What do you think of it? It's the last
Yeah,
minute
but
thing
again,
to
it
answer.
depends on the context, right? So some people might take an like an offensive remark as quite humorous in a particular context. So as long as it's
Yeah,
not
like
bigoted,
why
right? As long
such
as you're
high?
not being racist or like extremist, then a slight joke that could offend someone, made like seen ironically, could, again, it just totally depends on who you're communicating with.
Yeah, I would say better to expose yourself to as much real English as possible and learn the ropes of registers. Yeah, because when you feed on something, you
Hmm.
obviously give it back. Yeah, metaphorically speaking. Then just use like something like bookish English
Yeah.
or too informal English. Yeah, you just need to understand who you're talking to. Even today, if I were to speak Russian with you, if we could speak Russian together, I would still use a little bit of a formal kind of, yeah, register, because we're using terms, we're trying to drive ideas home, we are educated, right? We're teachers. But if I were to go out to a pub with you, we would definitely use some, you know,
Yeah,
informal
we
and
might even be
slang
cursing.
terms, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I hope to do that one day with you, though.
For sure. Yeah.
Going out
Yeah.
for a drink, you know, for some coffee. Thank you so much, Ty. I think it has been an amazing 1 hour and
Hmm.
a half, okay, of discussing the intricacies of authentic communication in English. I hope that you guys watching live and on demand now got a bit of a more insight into what and who defines the norms. Please make sure you appreciate us, our talk, by leaving a comment and hitting the like button. Yeah, so thank you so much, Ty, for making the time. I can see your cat lying around,
Oh, is he?
getting
Oh,
rested
yeah,
up
he is
too.
there too, isn't he? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, you see, so he goes down in history too. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
I
Thanks for
learned
having
a
me. It was
lot as
great.
well. You know, it was such a pleasure. And one of the comments was, "I'm so kind of happy to be listening to your beautiful English." It was about you, Ty. We enjoyed it so much too.
Thanks. Yeah.
Thank you
No
for the
worries. Thanks for having
exposure.
me.
Yeah, thank you so much. I hope to do it one more time with you anytime soon. Maybe have
Yeah,
some
sure.
different topics, okay? Because it turned out really cool. All right, thank you
Yeah.
so much, guys. Thank you, Ty.
You
Hope
too.
to see
Take
you
care.
soon.
Yeah.
Have a great day.